but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. That is Eddie Howe's press conference review for the game on Sunday, 4:30 against Wolves at home. Reza was first up, and he asked about Fabian Schär, how he was. He said, well, he's trained well. It's good to see him back. And he also asked if there was any other injury issues. He said there's a couple of knocks to some players from the Man City game, but nothing too serious. Reza then focused on Bruno. Been a lot of social media rumours about Bruno's ankle and maybe he could be missing this weekend. Well, Eddie put our fears to rest there. He said he's fine. He's not missed any training. There's no long-term effects, and from his point of view, nothing to worry about. Reza asked him how important the next two games were going to be for Newcastle United, and he went, they're vital. It's two big games. We want to go into these games and get as many points as we can from them, and we want to go into the international break feeling good. And getting back on track. He's determined to end the banned run, he said. And he said, of course, when these two games are over, we're running out of games in the season. So, we've got to take our opportunities in these next two games. Reza then focused on Wolves. He said, is this a more difficult game? Because, Wolves have turned things around. They've climbed out of the relegation issue and, more of a serious team. He said, look, the manager who they've brought in has had a big impact. He's got very good players there. He expects it to be a tight game. It was a tight game earlier in the season. ASM's goal got us back in it. We of course hit the bar after that as well. I think that was Jacob Murphy. But he said they're a technical team. They've got a good midfield and they've got good forwards. He's expecting a tough game. Reza then said that the substitutions last season made an impact. And he said, is it different talking to these kind of players, and telling them the reason they're not starting when you're on a winning run, as opposed to, telling them they're not starting when you're on a losing run. He just said, look, all of these players who you're mentioning, when he was talking about Willock, he's talking about Isak, he's talking about ESM. He went, all of those players have got individual issues and individual situations. He went, Willock's had niggles all season. Alex is the same, and to a degree ASM, they haven't been at their optimum fitness levels. And he said Premier League is difficult, and if you're not at the optimum fitness level, then you're never going to be able to feature on a regular basis. So he's pointing towards fitness really, more than anything else. He then asked him about Murphy. He said he's been an ever-present in Premier League games, but he's only started 5 of them. Done well off the bench. And Eddie said, look, he's done well off the bench, but that's not his sole role. It's not lost on me how well he's done in recent games when he's come on. He's pushing for a start, he said. Keith Downey from Sky was next. Decided to start with Lascelles, our club captain. He said he did well last week, and, how much can he do in the run-in for Newcastle? Basically, Eddie said that Lascelles had benefited from his training. Said he's clearly focused day to day. He's led by example because he hasn't had much game time, and he's felt that he deserved that performance last week, and he deserved the start. He knew he wouldn't let him down, and he didn't. Keith then pushed it a bit and said, some players in that position, the heads would go down, maybe they wouldn't. And he just said, look, Jamal Lascelles is, he's got the added responsibility of being club captain. He set a wonderful example day to day, and he hasn't wasted his time. And he said, I would say that to any player who finds them, do not waste your time. Make sure you're always fit and ready to go, because you never know when that chance will come. He said then that the media attention this week had been on Bruno. Obviously, he won the North East Football Writers Player of the Year award. There was talk of a new contract potentially in the offer. He asked if there'd been any progress on that. Not to my knowledge, was Eddie's reply. And then, he continued on the Bruno theme and asked him how important he was going to be, in the future, really, with him now and in the future. And he said he's a very important part of our squad. You don't find players like him at all. He said, I've said that before. He's got a wonderful eye for a creative pass. He's still only young, and he's only going to get better with age. Andy Sixsmith was next. he was, he was basically saying, he started on results actually. You don't get results. He says sometimes you get results when you shouldn't get results, and other times you get results. You don't get results when you should. So when you're playing well, you could get beaten, etc. It was a strange question to start with, and you can see I'm getting confused asking it. But he was basically just saying, sometimes you just don't get the rub of the green, and does that impact on the decisions that you make? And he went, look, I focus on the training. He said this many times before. He said this week it's been good. He said, I'm seeing the effort from the players. He says, I believe that we've been unlucky in periods of each of the last 3 games. He said, but that's when things behind the scenes are tested. And he said, what I've seen at training this week, the players have responded in the right way and I've got the right answers. So he's clearly very happy. Longstaff was next on Andy Sixsmith's question list. He was saying when he was going through a bad time, Alan Shearer came in and spoke to him and had a chat with him, and he turned things round. And he just said, can things really be solved as simply as that? And he went, yeah, they can. Football can be like that. It can be, it can be like that. He says in football, it does pay you back in many, many ways. Andy then said, look, the last 3 games have been against big teams. So maybe they were always going to be difficult, and what's your thoughts on that? And he goes, yeah, look, they were against the big teams, Manchester United, Man City, Liverpool. He says, been very difficult, and they were always going to be difficult. He says, but I still take a lot of praise for the team because they played well in a lot of aspects. And he said, Pope had 1 save to make last week, apart from the 2 goals he conceded. He says, we didn't take our chances. He said, but we need to keep the confidence, which has got us, which has served us so well. And, things will even out. I think that's what he was trying to say. Safe standing has been on the agenda this week. We've spoken about it on this platform. He just wanted to know what his view about it was. He says, I'm all for it. He said, I did that. It's what I did as a lad. He says, as long as it's safe. And then Andy said, why do you think the Wolves manager has done so well? He said, because he's managed his players well. He's got the best out of them. And, essentially, that is why the results have improved. He was asked if the weather was going to disrupt his training, or had it disrupted his training. We've had a bit of snow up in the northeast, as everybody else has nationwide. Simple answer, no. Nisha from the BBC then said, at the start of the season, the top 4 would have been, like dreamland. But we've been in the top 4 for so long. We're now down to 6th. Is it still realistic to say that we could be in a Champions League? He said, look, belief's very important. We believe we can win again. He said, I've never talked us up with regards to targets of where we could finish in the league. He said, you get patches in the season where you win and when you shouldn't, and you get patches in the season where you lose and you shouldn't, and it evens out. That was the theme of today's press conference. You can get a feel for that. Nisha then said, it's been a while since you've had to cope with the defeats. How have you coped with it, and have you drawn from past experiences? He said, look, we're not in a dark place. He says, we continue to do what we do in training. We try to improve things that need improving. And we look at the dynamic of the team. And he says, believe you me, they will get it right. She then moved on to Callum Wilson, who on his own podcast had mentioned that, he held his hands up and he was, admitting that he needs to start performing better. She said, what do you make of that kind of comment? He said, look, I know him very well. He says, I can draw on the relationship that we have, and the fact that he's taking full ownership is a good thing. He's a vastly experienced player and he will score goals again. So certainly doesn't sound like, Callum Wilson will be sitting on the bench tomorrow from my view. Damien was next up. He said, was a difficult run always inevitable? He said, well, I didn't want it to happen, but now we're in it. Tell me a team that hasn't been in a difficult run, and again, just pointed to the fact that things even out, and if they continue playing the way they are, he's got no doubt that they will come out of this sooner rather than later. He asked him if he could park it, or does this kind of thing consume him when he goes home, and he says, you'd have to ask others. He says, I try not to, but I'm only human. Lee Ryder was next. He said, you've often said that the selection process comes from the training sessions. He says some fans are suggesting that loyalty is creeping in. He ummed and ahed a little bit at the start and then went, look, nobody watches training but me and the coaching staff. He says, we don't select players on loyalty. If we did, where would you draw the line? He says you draw it on what you see in training, and you draw it on the best chance of getting a positive result in each match, and that's different week to week. He said that can be loyal and that can be ruthless. Lee then mentioned Wilson. He said he missed last week the golden opportunity against Manchester City, but then he said, to be fair to him, the service hasn't been great. Eddie said, look, yeah, against the last three teams, you won't get many chances against the likes of Man City, Manchester United, and against Liverpool. He says, and no doubt about it, you've got to take the chances when they come along. He said, but he says from his perspective, there's no finger pointing internally. And he just harked back to what he'd said earlier, Denisha, that Callum Wilson will score goals. Lee then asked him about the stoppage time scenario at Manchester City last week, where they were doing a little bit of time wasting. Lee said he found it a bit unsavoury. Eddie just said, my take is that, we just wanted the ball. He says, I've got no issue with what Man City did. And he says, in fact, I'd compliment them on what they did. He then finished off by saying, only Manchester City and Liverpool have beaten you this season. Would you have taken that at the start of the season? He went, yeah, of course we would. At the start of the season, we would have taken it. And he says, and the good thing is that European qualification in whichever competition is still in our hands. Miles was next up and asked about Willock and Isak. He just said, where are the fitness wise? He focused on Isak, and he just said Isak's in a good place. It's the most consistent training that he's done. The concussion, which he's mentioned a couple of times now, has set him back, but now he's back to building his top levels. He asked about Ashby as well. He said he's picked up a small hamstring and hasn't trained for the last couple of weeks. Ian Murtagh from the Daily Star was next. He said, outside of the club, people are saying this is a slump. Do you feel it's a slump? He went, it's difficult because I would say in results it is, but in performances it's not. He said, I'm not saying that everything's great. He says, but we need to win games. We need to score goals and we need to defend better. So it's a team effort when you're winning. It's a team responsibility, I guess, when you're losing, is what he was putting across there. He asked him if there's any concern. He went, always when you're not winning. And he says, but we are trying to improve day by day. Craig Hope then asked about Isak. He says, does there come a point when a £60 million player on the bench comes to you and says, I want to play? And he just said, look, Alex will be the decider of his own destiny, and that can only be done by his performances when he plays. So he also suggested that he was a number 9, a forward, Hope, and he's questioning. And Eddie didn't shoot him down. He just said, look, we don't see him as one dimensional. We'll utilize him in varied roles. He's not defined by one position. Craig then said, is he asking to play up front when you have conversations with him? And he said, I've not had a huge long conversation about game time. He says, I'm sure he wants to play, but he's still not 100% fit to play 90 minutes. He said, would he like to expand on the answer to the early question in the press conference about injuries, a couple of knocks to players. He says, would you like to expand on that? He went, no. And there was a bit of laughter. Chris was next up, and he just said, last weekend you had 3 substitutes, all good substitutes coming on. He made a triple substitution at Man City, and he said, you've not had that luxury. Was it nice to have that? And he said, yeah, it was great to have that in our armory. He says, our plan last week was to attack the game. He says, which I think everybody would have seen, which of course we did. And he said, I think having 3 subs on the bench benefited those who started because they knew you had those players breathing down the neck, but the 3 players who came on had enough time to try and change the game and get back in the game. He says, so it benefited all parties. Chris also said, are you going to go away to Dubai in the international break? And he confirmed that was definitely what was going to happen. Martin then asked him about, I think it was Martin Hardy, said, Pep gave you a bit of praise last week in his interviews. Does it resonate with you? He says, it's nice, but it doesn't change anything. He says, I take little notice of what other managers say. And he then said that the stats are still bearing out, Newcastle are still playing well. And he said, stats are one way of measuring things, but I'm not fixated on stats. He says it's useful, to have them. He says, but I'm not fixated on them. Martin then asked a question which has been asked before in other press conferences about Isak and how frustrating it is for him. Is he getting frustrated? And he just said, look, he's in a good frame of mind. He's positive and he's an outstanding talent. And, watch this space is more or less what he was saying. Jordan asked him about Joe Linton, how big a miss he was going to be. He said it's a big blow. He's been very important. He's at a different level compared to where he was when he came to the club, and he will be a big miss. Jordan then asked him how important it would be for a player to come in and stake a claim in place of Joe Linton. And he said, yeah, he says, with the negative for Joe Linton, it's a positive for somebody who comes in, and it is up to them to be able to do that. Kieran, then in his Irish voice, asked him about John Henry's comment at Liverpool saying that spending should be curbed more. The way it's been written up in the press is that it was aimed at Newcastle. There was no reference to Newcastle, but it was more in essence, in general, that there should be more curbs on spending. He just said, are these teams getting scared? A lot of laughter again, because Eddie just said, that was out of the blue, and it was said in a very nice way. But he said, no, he says, it would be unfair for me to comment, he says, because I haven't, heard the interview. He says, but I would rather there was no more restrictions. And Kieran's final question, and the final question of the press conference was, is Bruno the kind of template player that you want to sign in the next transfer window? And he went, yes, of course, affordable players, players who can, come in and do a job and play in the same way that we like to play. So it's as simple as that. Good press conference today. Big shout out to BT, who is in the chat. He says, looks like we will be taking a trip to Dubai after the Forest game. Les, good afternoon. Eddie's take on Isak not starting games was interesting, i.e. not ready for full 90 minutes. Yep, exactly. As opposed to Wilson, keeping him out of the starting lineup. Sounds like Wilson will start. That's exactly what I got out of it. 100%. As easy, Steve, big up, bro. We got humbled on Sunday, our kid. You're not wrong, mate. Bad result that for you. Also sounds like Eddie has a soft spot for Wilson. Well, of course he will. He's known him for many, many times. No further mention in the press about Fraser. That's all gone. That's all gone to rest now, hasn't it? 100%. Az says you need to play Isak through the middle. He's quality from what I've seen at Sociedad. He is a good player. We just need to find the right time and place to play him. Trull says, not saying he plays anyone because of Lightly, but Wilson hasn't been good for weeks now. So why has he played him for so long? Because he's an out-and-out goal scorer, and clearly the others aren't. I think that's it. Isak may well play for 70 minutes. I think he's certainly not going to play him for 90 by the sounds of it. Remember, he wanted to start ASM so you could get a proper warm-up. Maybe the same for Wilson. I don't know. Yeah, lots of chat, lots of ideas, and lots of thoughts. I was talking to a Wolves fan last night. He said Ruben Neves loves scoring against Pope. Well, you're not wrong, Tom. But yeah, that's it for me, folks. Today, I will be back at 5 o'clock with the three amigos. Plenty to talk about tonight, I'm sure. I'm going to play out now with the ads. Thanks for joining us. Please give this a like and give it a share. A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at skipsandbins.com. Telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Easy contract, free and pay as you go, waste collection. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria. You can order them from mrvickies.co.uk or by calling 01768 210 102. Welcome aboard to Fruy Vita Getaways. You can email them at fruivitagetaways@gmail.com. Call or text them 0792 842 7895. Please join and share their Facebook group as well at Fruy Vita Getaways. Book your holidays or short breaks in the UK or around the world with them. Let them find your happy place. ABTA and ATOL registered. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle. And the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com, where you can buy lots of t-shirts and merchandise. If you want to subscribe to the show, hit the subscribe button underneath this video today. It is free to do so. Hit the thumb up to like the video. It's good for the algorithm. And click share to your other social media. If you do subscribe, we do send you a free car sticker. To get that, email john@nufcmatters.com and he'll post you one out. If you want to join the NUFC Matters cult, then put your smartphone over this QR code now and it will take you straight there. Alternatively, go to the website, nufcmatters.com, and you can join for a one-off payment of £25. You'll receive a cup, a pen, a membership card, and a scarf and entry into the monthly draw. You can also join via YouTube, and if you click join beneath the video, you will see a variety of prices and how you can support the channel. You can alternatively make a donation with a super chat in the chat tonight. Just click the $sign. We're also available on iTunes and Spotify and other podcast providers. We also help the food bank on this show. NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk is where you'll find the matchday bucket, and you can make a virtual donation 365 days of the year. As always, we've got a whole host of events coming up throughout the year. An evening with Nobby Solano takes place on Saturday the 25th of March at the Tyneside Irish Centre. Tickets £15, book now at nufcmatters.com. An evening with Peter Beardsley at Leamington Labour Club. Tickets are £20, 31st of March, and you can get them direct from the venue. An evening with Nobby Solano, Good Friday, the 7th of April at 4 p.m. Tickets are a tenner and available behind the bar at Felling Cricket Club in Gateshead. An evening with Supermac, hosted by Gibbo at the Tynemouth Surf Cafe, Tuesday the 11th of April. And tickets direct from the venue. This is a limited ticket event, only 35 tickets available, so book soon. And an evening with Frank Clark and John Gibson, Thursday the 20th of April. Tickets are £15. Book now at nufcmatters.com. In June, Rob Lee will be at Louis Liquor Store in Newcastle, and you can get tickets direct from the venue. And an evening with Rob Lee, Lee Clark, John Beresford takes place the following evening, Friday the 2nd of June at the Grand Hotel in Gosforth. This is in aid of the Heel and Toe charity, and tickets are available from their website, www.heelandtoe.org.uk/events. And if you're a boxing fan, the Night of Champions comes to Gateshead at the Fed. Frank Bruno, Ricky Hatton, Nigel Benn and Joe Calzaghe are part of the UK tour, and you can get your tickets from www.goldstarpromotions.co.uk.